I was abducted, because, time, you lose, if you're abducted, from everybody I've ever interviewed on the show, they don't know the time. They lost time. If they were abducted for a day, 2 days, or even a couple minutes or whatever. And I'm just wondering myself, even, on that desert night, if I was abducted, had an implant, because something is weird, because I know for a fact I never had anything, put in by any medical thing. And they said it's a hunk of metal. They can't figure out what it is. And I told the doctors, I said, can you remove it? No, you have scar tissue. It's built up around it. If we remove it, you'll be in the wheelchair the rest of your life. Strange. Things like that make you wonder. And that's why I get back to you. You heard this music, this really intensive, enticing, serenade of music. And it's drawing you more into the pasture or out wherever it was. You maybe came so close to being abducted, or maybe you were and you don't realize it. And maybe the psychic was too. You don't know. Have you ever thought about, having an MIR done and seeing if you have any foreign matter in your body?
Well, that's something down the road. But let me ask you this, Gary. Do you recall what year and what part of New Mexico?
All I remember is, I drove nonstop from North Carolina back to Seattle. I know I was in New Mexico. I was going through a desert. I remember vaguely, now I could be totally wrong, that the speed limit was either ridiculously high or no speed limit. Do you remember what the speed limit was in New Mexico back in the mid-'70s?
Yeah, in the mid-'70s, you could be, even let's go back to the 60s. There were some areas where it would have 80 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour. Some places would have no speed limits going back into the 1960s, early 1970s. So you'd be just going, 90 miles an hour?
Yeah, that's what I was doing. I was doing around 90-something, and, I thought, well, gee, here I am. I'm going to get a big fat ticket, and I'm broke as you can be. How am I going to pay it? And, I'm scared that the car is going to get impounded. I'm going to be sitting in jail. But
right. There was a couple of places that would have a white sign that would even say, gosh, and I'm thinking this is close to the Arizona border, would say 85, and then at dark, it would say like a dark sign saying 70, 75. So that's how fast you could go in those areas. But yeah, that's very interesting what you just said about this light. I've interviewed and talked to different people, and this has happened in West Texas, the Panhandle area, desolate road, no vehicle coming or going, and all of a sudden their cockpit lights on up. And what was that? As bright as a star shell. What just happened? That's. Let me ask you another question there, Gary. Afterwards, because I do a lot of research on this. Okay, weeks after, days on after, did you have any, if you can remember, any unexplained bloody noses?
No, not that. I do know that. Number one mistake was I took no-dose, if you know what that is. And I started that from when I left North Carolina, New Bern, North Carolina, till I got back to Seattle. And when I hit Seattle, honestly, I crashed at my mom and dad's house, and I slept for like 3 days straight. But I tell you, it was the weirdest feeling, that, I ever had when I was standing out there. And I vaguely remember another car was didn't even pull over, was stopped in the middle of the road behind me, maybe a couple 100 feet. And, it didn't come towards me or nothing. It was a stop. Maybe it was just looking at this bright light like I was. But, it was right over me, the car, like I said, it lit up the whole inside of the car.
Huh.
I think maybe if we were abducted, they saw my ex-wife, and, which was actually a former Miss Washington, but after maybe talking to her psychologically or whatever they do for more than about 1 minute, they probably threw us back in the car and said, get out of there.
Okay. Well, she saved your life, my friend.
Yeah, that's about the only thing she did for me.
Gosh. Yeah, there's how curious. That's very, very curious. I don't know. I one of the things about this area, there's different UFOs. When we do have UFO waves, hey baby, we get them. And one of the things about the different craft here, you think to yourself, well, is it because there's different models, or is it different species? But you think to yourself, well, each nation has a distinctive type of craft. Like, for example, the old Soviet Union with their Soyuz craft would have that insect bug-like type of craft versus our Apollo craft, which would be like darts. And here in northern New Mexico, when we've had UFO activity, there's been three different classifications of craft. You get the classic cigar-shaped craft. You get a saucer of sorts that looks like it's coming in and out of focus. It's as if it's coming in and out of, maybe a dimension. And this craft is sometimes yellowish, orangish, sometimes even a little bit of purple in it. And then you have the spherical globe-like craft. And these are silver in color, and it's going to be very bright color, kind of like the old World War II P-51 Mustangs, that type of aluminum.
Oh, yeah.
Or the cowling on the Spirit of St. Louis in the Smithsonian, that type of globe type of that's what's on the globe type craft. And I've seen some UFOs here in the area, and I would say that the most dramatic one was this sphere, and this silver craft came across the sky. It wasn't going that fast, and all of a sudden it just accelerated, went straight on up, and in 2 seconds, it's gone. It's out of the stratosphere.
Now, have you ever seen or heard any reports in your area, like triangle ones? Art Bell, which was a friend of mine, he claims him and Ramona saw a UFO, right over his head, and they were absolutely quiet, no sound, but they were triangle.
Well, this was a few days before the famous Phoenix Lights in 1997. And when was that? April or March of 1997? And north of Santa Fe, from Pojoaque to Sucre to Los Alamos area, and this was going to be, close to, let's say, give you a large gap, from 8:30 to 9:30, or 8:30 to 9 o'clock, 9:15. There was a triangular craft that was seen. Now, I saw it myself, and so did many other people, but it was not at nighttime. This was right when we saw it. There was still enough light, and how it worked, even though it was springtime, that I may be getting the time element wrong, so it was a little bit earlier. I guess it was just when the reports started coming in between. But the point being about this is this craft was triangular, but it was more like a thin arrowhead type of shape. It did seem to expand a little bit, but it was nowhere near as broad as what was seen over Phoenix. And that was a few days before the Phoenix Lights. So that was something that the national media did not cover on up. And, of course, the spin doctors would say, well, what you saw on up there, that was a C-130 tanker that was flying on over north of Santa Fe and to Los Alamos area. And, people say, well, you know what, We know what a C-130 looks like, and we know what a C-130 sounds like. This did not make any noise, and that was not a C-130. But it did have some type of, what can you say, pliable technology to it so that it could tend to seem like it expanded a bit, or a good deal. But again, too, it was nowhere near as large as what they saw in Phoenix.
Well, don't forget, I'm sure you know who Stephen Bassett is.
Yes.
Okay, he was on my show about 2.5 weeks ago, and he is so positive that within a year, if not sooner, the government is actually going to admit that we've been, being visited, not by somebody from another country, but from, outer space. And he is so positive that, it's about ready to happen. I mean, things are, being released that would never be, released, before, like, the fighters from the Navy fighters off the aircraft carrier. Now,
right.
That was a few years ago, but it was released in November last year. Somehow it hit the media and hit YouTube and, and all that stuff, where they, try to catch it. They saw it making turns that's impossible for anything on our planet to do, let alone if you were a pilot of the craft, you would be like, splattered inside whatever it was. I mean, you'd be gone. And then all of a sudden, then you have, back, I think like around January, the Secretary of the U.S. Air Force to the cadets making some remark, and you can take it either different ways, but, if you kind of put all this stuff together, it kind of matches in a way. He was telling the cadets, the graduating class of cadets, well, guys, the next war is not going to be a ground war. It's going to be out there in space. Then, about 2 months later, our president, Trump, jokingly, at least the first time, says, it's about time we create a space force. Then, all of a sudden, him and the vice president get out there and say that they gave orders to the Pentagon to create a space force. Now, that's up to Congress to pass that in the Senate. I don't know if it'll fly or not, to finance it. But it kind of like, why all of a sudden are you admitting that we need a space force? Do we already have one? Are some of those objects we've seen right now ours? Is it the technology that going back to Roswell and all the other times afterwards that,
Yeah, I think you're right. And that is, I think we have something, and that's Black Ops. And as far as us going on out there, I would think that we have, but we're not telling the rest of the world. I do not believe that, I don't think that Bassett is right. I do not think there's going to be full disclosure. I can't see that happening, not with the way that
no, but
all
he
the
said
world governments are.
He said it will start, and now don't forget, all it would take is, maybe somebody like in Brazil government coming out. They tell their people. When every time there's a UFO, they let on the news, they let the people know that, hey, there's they actually admit to their public, their people, that there's UFOs. But all it would take is Russia to jump to the news and admit, hey, we're being visited by UFOs, and they're not as friendly as what some people think they are. Then we're going to have egg on our face. Are we going to sit there and say, well, you're lying, Russia, aren't you? Or do we start like now, all of a sudden, all through history, that video with those two fighter pilots off the aircraft carrier, technically that should never even hit the news. I don't even know how that did. They didn't even try debunking it for once.
Right. Okay, now I'll agree a little bit with what Bassett has said in the past, and he's saying that we are being programmed so that humanity, Americans, are going to admit or think, that there is creatures from points unknown on out there. Now, if we were to go back just 40 years ago or 48 years ago, let's just say, let's give 1970 as a milestone. They say, oh, that's science fiction. There's no such thing, and blah, 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 blah. But with the way that the American populace has been programmed,